He served in Hijacked Squadron, which was a transport squadron that operated between Australia and the islands during the war and well up in the islands. And then in 1947 he joined MMA for 5 years. He ran Air Beef from its infancy. He always kept his eyes on the local population as well as the sky to see what the weather was like. And he noted this very attractive girl that was there, who later became an air hostess. Her name was Pat Fiddler. She came from Broome, so she became Miss West Australia. And I can remember the occasion when it happened. And then the next thing I noted in the paper was that Sturdee had married her. And that was a very good move because they're still together and they have a very, very happy life. He had trained in the RAF in 1942, and in 1953 he left Australia to fly with KLM, Middle East Airways, Trans-Arabia, Iran Air. Among the types he flew overseas were the DC-3, the DC-6B, the Convoy 240 and 340, Comet 4C, the Boeing 47. Ladies and gentlemen, I've got much pleasure in inviting Sturdee Jordan to come and address you.
I'd like to tell you that you couldn't know that one could ever get here and speak and go through exactly the hijacking I went through. So it's written exactly and in the sequence that it occurred. So before I start on the hijacking, we were hijacked 37 years ago. I was lucky to survive it, very lucky to survive it, but in 6 weeks' time I'll be 93. So before I start the hijacking, you've got Tehran, Iran, a totally different place to what it is now, the danger of the future. And I'd just like to give this preamble briefing before I start the hijacking. I'm here to tell you that Iran had 3 hijackings which took place in 1970-1971, and they were politically motivated due to instability of class differences in Iran. Iranian people were made up of the very rich people and the very poor masses, and with insufficient middle class people, instability was inevitable and was causing concern. The Shah of Iran, that is parliamentary regime and parliamentarians, ran the country, and Iran was military United States equipped and had American advisors, and was in those days very pro-West. Iran had foreign captains and foreign ground engineers and maintained a good standard of operation. Pan Am also had a little bit to do with it in those days. Captain Egland, he was from Pan Am for 2 years when I was there. Then he was replaced by a senior Iranian captain. Also, Mr. Deutsch, he was the operations manager for the entire 5 years I was there. Now, Mr. Rada was the Shah's trusted Prime Minister. His religion was a Baha'i, and during my 5 years there, Iran, the Iranian security was good under what was called Savak. They were the Iranian security. And there were several churches of different religions, hotels, things were very normal then, clubs, Freemasonry, they were operated normally. Life generally was a good standard when my wife and I were there. But it gradually worsened when we left, and it is history that the Shah and the Pahlavis were thrown out when the Ayatollah Khomeini and these extreme Shiites took over power at the beginning of 1980. Now, there were no diplomatic relations between Iran and the Lebanon during the 5 years we were in Tehran. No airline services were run between the two countries by Iran Air and also any Lebanese airlines. The cause, General Bakhtiari was leading a subversive regime trying to overthrow the Shah and his Pahlavi rule. And he just managed to escape to Beirut in the Lebanon. When the Lebanese government failed the Iranian government's request to extradite General Bakhtiari, diplomatic relations were severed. General Bakhtiari was working against the Shah once in the Lebanon, and then he transferred to Baghdad in 1970, and he was the one that set up the training school just outside Baghdad, training saboteurs to go across the Iraqi border, the Iran-Iraqi border, and they were damaging. So that gives you some idea of why hijackings came along just afterwards. So I'll start the hijacking. Another DC-6 captain and I were detailed by Iran management to do several DC-3 flights, each to route check some air taxi pilots to United Arab Emirates with a night stop Dubai. The flights comprised, I was on the last one, so I'll go on with my planning with Air in November 1970. This was my last DC-3 flight to Dubai with air taxi on the 8th of November, returning to Tehran on the 9th. Then I was scheduled to do my last 3 flights on the DC-6 with Air on the 12th, the 14th and the 17th of November. I was then planned to have a week off and start my ground technical course on the Boeing 737 with Boeing, commencing the last week in November, followed by my flying training. The last jet I was endorsed on was the Comet 4C, which was 6 years before, in 1964. The air taxi flight on the 8th of November was carried out with air taxi. It was a DC-3, but it was a 25-seat configuration. I had an air taxi first officer by the name of Shakiba and an air steward, Ali. The route was, as I've just mentioned, Tehran, Isfahan, Shiraz, Bandar Abbas, overnighting there. On the morning, this is the one, on the morning the 9th of November 1970, we, the crew, were on the aircraft at Dubai, awaiting the load sheet I had assigned and the passengers to be loaded. I saw about half a load, or just over half a load of the passengers walking across the tarmac, were then seated when the load sheet I signed showed 14 passengers, or half the usual load of passengers. I said to my co-pilot, Shakiba, I'm going down the back to speak to the Dubai area manager before he takes away the steps. I asked him why the half-loaded aircraft, which was usually full on the Dubai Bandar Abbas section. His foolish answer was, maybe the customs at Bandar Abbas will thoroughly search all the passengers. I said, if Dubai passengers know that, why don't you, as Dubai area manager, know any such information and the makeup of such a load? I took off from Dubai, was turning right onto 010 course to Bandar Abbas. We were out over the sea from Sharjah incidentally charged about 45, 50 miles away from Baghdad. I said to my co-pilot, oh no, where are we? I took up the 010 course to Baghdad. We're out over the sea from Sharjah when the two men burst into the cockpit. One, who was masked, screamed at me whilst jabbing the loaded revolver into my head just behind my ear and screaming, "Baghdad, Baghdad." The second hijacker had a long dagger over the head of my first officer, Shakiba. I glanced at the revolver wielding hijacker, saw only squinty eyes because of the mask, and while turning the aircraft left through 70 degrees onto a heading of 300 degrees, and I just pointed to him, "Baghdad," and I pointed ahead. He stopped his screaming, but held the revolver firmly against my head. I then gathered my thoughts to try and size up the situation. I said to Shakiba, "I do not know who they are, but our situation is clearly this. If we get them to Baghdad, we have a good chance of survival, and if we fail to meet their request, they will not hesitate to kill us. There is one big obstacle that stands in the way of our survival, and that is a big doubt about having sufficient fuel to make Baghdad. To try to land at Kuwait would be our death sentence by the hijackers. Even to get to Baghdad and be obstructed from landing would be suicidal." So I said, "Shakiba, we need refuel to survive." It was about this time that Shakiba said to me, "I hear Farsi being spoken." That's what they spoke. They are Iranians, and of course my co-pilot, he was Iranian. With that statement, the gun-wielding masked hijacker said to Shakiba in broken English, "You no speak," then ripped off his headset and threw it behind his seat. I said to Shakiba, "Do not say anything unless I say, and do not upset this gunman, or he will kill you. He will not kill me, because he is keen to get to Baghdad. Because you are an Iranian, your Farsi language will communicate to him precisely as I require." I also said it was my opinion that the gun-wielding hijacker would have studied and knows the route. He definitely would have studied it. And he also spoke some broken English. Also, it was obvious our steward alley must be bound up down the back, or he would have tried to get to us up at the cockpit. I said to Shakiba, "Tell this revolver-carrying hijacker in Farsi that we've not got enough fuel to get to Baghdad, and we need to land for fuel, and tell him I will show him the remaining fuel on the fuel gauges as I selected." He relayed that to the hijacker, and when he told him, I reached for the fuel gauge selectors. At the same time, the masked hijacker grabbed me by the wrists and commenced to scream at me. I said, "Shakiba, repeat in Farsi that we need fuel, and also tell him if we cannot land at a refuel aeroplane, we will crash into the sea." I had to try and get on top of this bloke. And the business on the fuel was a certain thing, and the next business, pointing to the sea, his position was such, he was standing up behind me, so he had a nasty angle to look at, whereas I'm sitting down, it wasn't too bad. I said to Shakiba, "Repeat to him in Farsi that we need the refuel, and also tell him if he cannot land at a refuel aeroplane, we'll crash into the sea. Tell him I will slowly select fuel gauges to show him our remaining fuel," which I did. I then reached to select the fuel gauges with the same result. he grabbed me by the wrist and screamed at me at passing. At this point, I saw red. Disengaged the automatic pilot, and I said, "You SB, you silly Willie." It was a bit stronger than that. Will you let me fly this aircraft, and at the same time push the nose of the aircraft down? I pulled some power back. It was pointing with different views of the sea. It really started the humjacker. So I said, level the aircraft out by raising the nose and introducing a bit of power. After a minute or so, he recovered. He said to me in broken English, "Where we land for fuel?" I had Doha in Qatar firmly in my mind, so I purposely said Bushehr, which support on the Persian Gulf, and this upset him as well. Bushehr is about there, and it was dynamite where he would go to Bushehr and we'd all be shot, of course. We'd be first and they'd be red. So the cockpit was filled with Farsi conversation for about a minute, and then the old hijacker, he'd had enough of the refuel suicide and looking at the sea. He said, "Go, Doha, you talk, I listen." That was the best bit of music I'd heard. And he said, "I listen, no one come near us." So I called up Doha Control. This is Air Taxi DC-3 landing Doha in about 35 minutes, flying at a cruising altitude of 8,500 feet. It is very important. We need fuel, and please use your megaphone to keep everyone except the refueling away from the aircraft. Our lives are definitely in your hands. The Doha controller came back by saying, "Are you being hijacked?" I said very clearly, "Affirmative." He said, "The only fuel available to you is 143 octane. Is that too high?" We used the DC-6 to be at 143 octane. I said to the tower operator, "The 143 octane will do." Please tell the refueler to bring the refuel unit up to the refuel point and fill the two main tanks. The 143 octane with the remaining 100 octane in the main tanks is okay. It is absolutely necessary for us to be refueled here to survive. I repeated to the tower operator, who was an Englishman, "Please use your megaphone to keep everyone away from the aircraft except the refueler, and tell him to fill the main tanks." The tower operator said, "Message is clear and understood. Call 10 minutes out." And he also threw this in, "You are clear to land." I called up Doha Tower 10 minutes out. I just got another one and received his wind direction coordinates, the altimeter setting, and no traffic, so clear to land again. I called on base leg and got that filmed. I was taxiing back along the runway to the turn-off point to the refuel point. I saw the English tower controller with his megaphone. He was up high, had a megaphone up in his mouth and calling out to the crowd of people who had moved outside the terminal building. The tower controller was up high on his walk around, that's the tower. Some people who seemed to be moving towards the aircraft stopped as we were at the underground refuel point. The young Arab refueler was hurrying with his unit to attach the refueling. When the refueler with his refuels unit was near the point, a refuel point. I reached for the mixture control levers to select them back to idle cut-off to stop the engines. The hijacker held my hands back and yelled, "No, stop," and jammed the loaded revolver into the right temple. I called the tower to ask the refueler to try and refuel the aircraft with the engines throttled back to idling. Tell him the reasons. I have never heard, and no one else has heard, of this ever being done before. And with the starboard engine rigid idling, I was torching a little, and I half expected perhaps some explosion when the starboard tank was being refueled. The refueler, he climbed up from the rear of the starboard wing, saw the torching when that engine was throttled right back to enable him to get the hose nozzle set to pump fuel. And then I advanced the revs a little to reduce the engine torching, which enabled the refueler to still stay on until the tank was receiving fuel. When the tank was indicating it was receiving fuel from the pump, I pointed to the fuel gauge, and the armed hijacker seemed to calm down slightly. It is unbelievable what happened. The refuel broke down and the refueling stopped. Now I will never know whether he got the jibbies or whether it really broke down. Anyhow, I'm here to talk. The armed hijacker then went mad and was screaming at me, "Go, go, go," and at the same time pushing the revolver into the side of my head. I thought, this is our ending. I quickly thought, go with a shortage of fuel and try and crash the aircraft when out of fuel. If not killed in the crash landing, be shot soon afterwards. I grabbed the microphone, called the tower and said, "This refuel unit has broken down." I left out the word supposedly. By megaphone, asked someone to replace this unit immediately. I have insufficient fuel to leave and we will be killed soon. It seemed like an eternity, but in actual fact, a replacement fuel unit was being raced across the tarmac, and I said to Shakiba, "Tell him the hijacker will now get our fuel and get into Baghdad." The refuel process seemed a long one, but with no one approaching the aircraft, and we were showing fuel increasing on the gauges, the fuel gauges. The gunman, the hijacker eased down a little again. On the completion of the refueling, I called the English tower operator and said, as the windsocks shows the wind is nearly calm, I request to use the northwest runway and would continue on that heading to our destination. We'll climb to 8,500 feet and that'll be our cruising altitude. He replied, "You are cleared to taxi and take off," and he asked to confirm if our destination was Baghdad. I answered affirmative. So I'll just slip this little bit in. We were idling for a long time, so I'll just tell you, we stopped on the brakes, had the engine revved up a bit, did a magneto check, so I've just thrown that in, which we did. After takeoff, I gave takeoff time and thanked English Corporation, which had definitely saved our lives. I said our operation, Mr. Deutsch, will find your name and correspond with you. If we successfully complete this mission, I will be reporting also. We did not ask to enter any control space, but most places would know when they received Dohar's message alerting sent along the intended route that we were being hijacked. To ask to enter any centre service airspace would have been suicidal. they would have refused and ordered us to land somewhere, which would be our immediate death sentence. We flew nearly over Bahrain, past Oman, along the south coast of Saudi Arabia, towards Kuwait. When approaching Kuwait, 3 Kuwaiti aircraft approached. They were American 3 F-16 aircraft fighters. They began flying crisscross near the nose of the aircraft at high speeds, dangerously close and severely buffeting our aircraft. It was frightening and it was very dangerous. I called up Kuwait Control and said, I'm sorry not to ask to enter your airspace and appreciate what you are trying to do, but I've no alternative but to continue to fly on this northwest course or be killed. I'm an Australian. Your fighter aircraft are flying very close to the nose of our aircraft, and when passing by, we are being dangerously buffeted by their slipstream. I would gratefully appreciate if you would call your 3 fighters off, as I have no alternative but flying northwest. If I land at Kuwait, I will be immediately shot. Kuwait came back. Just confirm your destination is Baghdad. I replied, affirmative. Within a few minutes, the 3 fighters were called off and departed. I called Kuwait and told them I appreciated their cooperation and thanked them. Now, after passing Kuwait a few minutes, I pointed to the masked man and his peanut mate over there. I said, Basra, Basra. Oh, after passing, I could see his eyes, the masked man, narrow, as if smiling under his mask. And he and his hijacked companion seemed to relax. And after 5 minutes, were standing back from the cockpit in front of the luggage compartment back there. Now what Shakiba did next put him in the idiot category. I thought, was he tired of living? After another few minutes, my co-pilot grabbed the headset from behind his seat, planted it on his head, and in Farsi began talking to Baghdad. Baghdad, of course, is just over from Basra. It's an Iranian airfield down the south. So when he did that, I ripped off his headset, threw it off behind his seat at the same time as a masked hijacker moved forward, screaming at him, jamming the revolver. I just missed by throwing the headset back, missing his revolver into the left side of his head. I started yelling at Shakiba and said, what are you doing? What are you doing, you stupid fool? He'll shoot you, kill you, and he doesn't care. I feel my intervention of ripping off Shakiba's headset may have avoided tragedy. I wound up by saying, do nothing operation in this aircraft unless I request it. Do you understand? He replied, understood. When I beam Basra, I called them up. I was doing all the work on the radio. You just sat there, and because we were getting into Iraqi territory, and that was dangerous, we threw in some bad sentence or something wrong, we could be in a bother. When I beamed Basra, I called them up and gave the time, our height 8,500 feet, our arrival time at Baghdad, asked them to call me back only to advise any other traffic information. After 5 minutes, Basra Control called back and said to call Baghdad Control on their frequency. I called Baghdad and gave them our flight details and estimated time of arrival at Baghdad. Then came Baghdad's instruction. You are not permitted to enter Baghdad's controlled airspace. And for your information, our runway is barricaded with trucks and obstacles. That went in one ear and out the other. One ear and out the other. I came back to Baghdad and said, there are a number of other centres monitoring our conversation. So I say to you, I will land on the taxiway. Baghdad replied that the taxiway also was closed by instructions and repeated, I said again, you are not permitted to land at Baghdad. I call Baghdad back with this message. For you and other citizens listening to our messages, I am an Australian. With a gun at my head, I have no alternative but to make Baghdad my destination. And also you must certainly know the reasons as well. And if Baghdad runway and taxiway are obstructed, I will crash land this aircraft on the most suitable ground as near to the airport as possible. I will call you back 10 minutes away. After about 10 minutes, Baghdad called me up and said that the runway is now cleared. He said, I am in charge of DCA, the Department of Civil Aviation, here, and ordered the obstruction and the clearing of the runway and taxiway, and we do not want to be known as haven for hijackers. I called him up, thanked him, saying we were 10 minutes out. He gave the wind direction QNH, said there is no traffic and we were clear to land. I requested, I didn't trust him in tuppence, so I requested to do a low run over the duty runway before landing, just in case they left something that would kill us. Permission was granted, and I said I look forward to speaking to you on the ground. After landing, I was taxiing back when I could see the master and the nearby sedan car with two suited gentlemen next to it. Of course, to impress them, the masked hijackers replaced the revolver to my head. After parking the aircraft and closing it down, this in-charge hijacker handed the revolver over to a real rough-looking, he had 3 heads, looking character, and then disappeared to confer with the 2 well-dressed DCA men. This new gunpointer held the revolver against my head until the Iraqi DCA men backed me down. The hijackers, after speaking to the 2 Iraqi DC men, Department of Civil Aviation, were grouped away, ready to go for interrogation. When Shakiba and I were walking down the cabin of the aircraft, I caught up with Steward Ali, who told me they had, after takeoff, they had, from the bay, there were 7 hijackers, including the 2 in the cockpit, plus 2 Dubai policemen who were in liaison with the hijackers. That's a total of 9. James Bond couldn't have beaten that lot. Also, he said there were only 5 only passengers on board. I said to Shakiba, you wait near the aircraft steps with Ali while I go over and speak to the 2 men from the Iraqi Department of Civil Aviation standing near their official car. I shook hands with them. One was the spokesman and the other was the listener. The chief said to me, I am the Iraqi in charge of civil aviation here, and it was me giving you the instructions whilst you were born to Baghdad. We do not want to be known as a haven for hijackers. I replied, with a loaded revolver at my head, I had no choice with my destination. I said I had a solution for them, not would have been known as a haven for hijack. He asked what was that. I said, after everyone's interrogating, disarm the Iranian hijackers plus the 2 attached debate policemen of any offensive weapons. Let me hire 2 or 3 of your genuine armed guards and allow me to fly them to either Tehran or Baghdad. His reply was that they could not get permission to allow that. He continued to say, after interrogation, we will allow you to take your passengers and 3 crew to Baghdad. I said this favoured treatment of hijackers leave me stunned, but I will say no more and depart for Baghdad with our 5 passengers after questioning. We were at Baghdad, you wouldn't believe it. It was around 6 hours we were at Baghdad with all their messing around. And we were questioned before we departed for Baghdad at about 6 p.m. local time with our 5 passengers. The 7 Iranian hijackers plus the 2 Dubai policemen who were in liaison with the hijackers stayed at Baghdad after being interrogated in a separate section of the airport. They were favourably received by the hijackers and their fate will be explained later in this reporting. I filed it clear at Baghdad airport to fly at 7,500 feet to Baghdad in Iran. It was a night landing, and when we were about 10 minutes out of Baghdad, Shakiba said to me, now he was the one that should have got shot. He said to me, can I do this landing? I have not done a night landing for 2 months. I answered, I'll do this night landing. Are you in the vein for taking up comedy? It's been a long day and I've had enough thrills for one day. In view of what's happened, there will be a crowd to meet us. So when I land the aircraft and we are taxiing to the parking bay, would you keep your eyes open? There were a number of soldiers near the parking marshal, and in the night lightning, it was very difficult but necessary to keep a sharp lookout for them. When I parked the aircraft, it closed down. There was some fellow who came charging up to the cockpit and said to me, I am so-and-so, I'm area manager here, and you will do this, and you will do that. I was at the end of my patience after a rough day. I said, get off the aircraft, I'll speak to you on the ground. When I met him after coming down the aircraft steps, I shook hands, and he directed the 3 crew and 5 passengers to the chief of security and the top customs officer. The 8 of us met the security and customs men, shook their hands, and the security chief said, you will fly up to Tehran on the air and air service departing Baghdad in about 1 hour. Your luggage will be loaded on the Tehran-bound aircraft and may be searched by the customs before departure. You will follow me into this room where you will be body searched and added, I have the power to search anywhere. I saw red and said, do what you want with the 5 passengers, but you will not, and I repeat not, search the crew. The security chief asked me, and we were in a suit at the time, I had a Dalton computer which we used to carry around, as you know. The security chief asked me, what is that round thing in my left hand shirt pocket? It was a round dotted computer. I pulled it out, I was nice and brassed off, pulled it out of my pocket And as I tossed it up in the air, I said it is a flying saucer. But no more questions were asked after my sarcastic remark. You can imagine how I felt. There was a humorous event, and this was humorous and it's true, which took place when one of our passengers was being searched, body researched, when watches and jewellery, a lot of it, fell from his clothing onto the floor next to his feet. It was obviously goods he was carrying with intent, probably to smuggle it around through our scheduled port, which was Baghdad. To have been a passenger on a hijacked aircraft and then lose or pay customs duty on his smuggled goods would indelibly stay in his memory for all time. Now, we the three crew went from Aberdeen to Tehran by Iranian's evening flight on the Boeing 727 aircraft, landing at Tehran at 9 p.m. That's 14 hours after we got on the aircraft. Now, on the flight from Aberdeen to Tehran, my co-pilot, the chap, Shakiba, sat with a top security officer in the seat behind me and was expounding away in Farsi to the security officer. I thought to myself, if Shakiba were wired up to a lie detector, it would certainly fly to pieces. At Maribor Airport, after customs cleared us, I was met by the general who was second in charge, and he greeted me enthusiastically. He was full of praise for surviving the day's hijacking. He then said, "Captain Jordan, I would like you to come with me and meet the press." I said, "General, it's been a long and tiring day and I'd like to go home to see my wife, who will be anxiously waiting for me." He said, "I would appreciate you meeting the press." I asked, "General, have I a choice?" He answered, "Yes." I replied, "Excuse me, General, but I must go home." So that press would have been a press talking to Shakiba and myself. That would be enough to pull a gun on myself. So I replied, "General, but I must go home." He said then, our Iranian general manager was General Kardami, he was a lovely bloke. "We'll call you in the next couple of days for an interview." I said, "I understand. Good night." It was great to get home to my wife Pat and see her because, frankly, at times, during the hijacking of the aircraft, I thought seeing her again was very remote. The second day after hijacking, I was called to Iranian's downtown head office for an interview with General Kardami. He was the chief, lovely bloke, and met our flight steward Ali coming out of his office. When I was called in to General Kardami's office, I generally covered some of the hijacking. He was pleased with the result and said they would communicate with the Englishman in charge of the tower operation at Doha in Qatar and thank him for his life-saving assistance. I am sure he was well rewarded. I also repeated General Kardami to make inquiries into the Dubai airman port action at Dubai, departing on the 9th of November 1970. This resulted in him being dismissed as Dubai area manager. General Kardami asked me how I spelled Sturdee, and I said to me, he said, "I'm going to make out a cheque for you, Captain Sturdee Jordan's award for what I'd done." I said to him, "I'm well paid, and I did what I did out of self-preservation, and I refuse to be paid." He said, "You will accept my cheque?" I said, General, I cannot accept it. With that, he moved forward in his chair and said firmly, you will accept my cheque. I knew to refuse his cheque further would be an insult to him, the worst thing he could do, and the loss of face. I then put my hand forward to accept his cheque and said, thank you for your kindness and generosity. He said, you may have whatever time you may need to get over this ordeal. I said, thank you, General, but I'll continue with my roster. This entailed flying my first of 3 DC-6 flights and then commencing my Boeing 737 course at the end of November in 3 weeks' time. This, in actual fact, gave me 3 days off between my day of being hijacked and my next DC-6 flight. After completing my course and getting my Boeing 737 command endorsement in my airline transport pilot's license, things went along smoothly, flying our routes. I have made mention of General Bakhtiari, the high-ranking military general who escaped from Iran to Lebanon to serve a death sentence for his subversive activities against the Shah Pahlavi Iranian rulers. With a breakdown of negotiations with the Lebanese government for his return, caused diplomatic relations between Iran and Lebanon to be severed for 5 years. I was employed within there from 1969 to 1974. It became known that General Bakhtiari went to Baghdad in Iraq in 1970, was training saboteurs to go across the Iranian border into Iran to damage or work towards the overthrow of Pahlavi rulers, with 2 Iranian air jackets, one from Tehran and one flight from Dubai, terminating at Baghdad. The hijackers in each case wound up at the saboteur training camp conducted by ex-Iranian General Bakhtiari against the Shahs and the Iranian government. You will not have seen this plan ever reported, but which is true, and as the Iranian air captain involved would still be alive, was well rewarded and lives in another country. I will not name him. The organised plan, which was carried out successfully in 1971, was to assassinate the defective high-ranking Iranian general in Iraq who was in charge of the camp to train saboteurs to go across the Iranian-Iran border for sabotage in Iran. The organised hijacking was known on board the Iranian Boeing 727 by only the Iranian captain flying the aircraft, and 4 hijackers from the Imperial Air Guard who were approximately dressed and correctly documented, as well as speaking their Iranian Farsi language. They spoke fluent Arabic. After the torture, after the airborne out of Tehran, 4 hijackers overpowered the opposition on the aircraft and went to the cockpit and, being armed, directed the captain to fly to Baghdad. As this was a planned hijacking, the captain was the only member of the crew who ever knew the plan. I got my information on the so-called hijacking from an impeccable source. At Baghdad, the hijackers were taken away separately and the crew and passengers were interrogated and allowed to depart. This resulted on the scheme hijacking was a success. The defaulting general was assassinated within 4 weeks of the arranged for Hijack's arrival. This scheme was a planned success. Well, that's about it.